Hello, this is Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium with Bringing the Darkness to the Light. Today, my guest is Monte A. Melnick. Monte A. Melnick spent 20 years from 1976 to 1996 as the tour manager for the iconic rock band, the Ramones, touring the world and worked over 2,200 shows. He is the author of the book On the Road with the Ramones, bonus edition available on Amazon. He was a signed artist on the rock band 30 Days Out with 2 albums on Reprise, Warner Brothers Records, 1971 to 1972. He also served as the audiovisual supervisor at the New York Hall of Science for over 16 years, from 2003 to 2019. Monte is now working as the in-house manager at the Queens Theater in the Park, the premier performing arts center in Queens, New York. It's a pleasure to have you on, Monte.
Well, thank you. It's nice to come out of the dark and into the light with you.
Yes, no, it's really interesting. I've been following the Ramones, especially through a lot of my friends over the years. So it's a thrill for me to have you on and to meet you, in person and to share you over the radio. So
Happy to be here.
Yeah, great. I have some questions. I want to go back in time with you for a moment. Growing up in Queens and realizing you loved music, when did you start to play bass?
Well, I went to junior high school and high school with Tommy Ramone, and I was in the chorus in junior high school with Tommy. I became very good friends with him in Forest Hills. And he was in bands at the time in Forest Hills High School. I saw them play in a band called the Tangerine Puppets in 1966, I believe. And it was a talent show in the Forest Hills High School, and he played with Johnny was on bass actually at the time, and Tommy was on guitar. So he's always into bands at the time. So we graduated high school '67, and he wanted to form another group after the Tangerine Puppets, and he said, well, I was good friends of his, and he said, why don't you pick up the bass and we'll form a band. I picked up the bass pretty quickly, and we formed a band right then and there. A group called Triad, a 3-piece group, kind of like Jimi Hendrix and Cream at the time. So that's how I got into the music business. Tommy got me into the business, the musical business there.
So your first band was actually with Tommy Ramone?
Yeah, I was in a couple different bands with him before the Ramones.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's really interesting because so you're bringing yourself back to junior high and high school. So the band that you started with Tommy was when you were in high school or after high school?
After high school, about 68, I believe, we had that band, that Triad. And then 71, 72, I got pretty good on bass, and I joined this group, 30 Days Out, which they got a recording deal on Reprise. Tommy was almost in that band, but they didn't need another guitar player, so he was almost in that band with me. So I was playing bass then, and after that group broke up, Tommy wanted to form another band. We formed a band called Butch with Jeff Salen, who was in Tough Darts on guitar, and Tommy, myself, and the drummer. And so that's another group before the Ramones. I was playing with Tommy. Actually, that group played the Mercer Arts Center the day before it fell down. I don't know if you're familiar with the Mercer Arts Center. It was a great venue at the time where a lot of bands played. The Dolls played there, and it's kind of a good venue for bands to come in and play their original material. And it fell down the day after we played there. It was great.
That was in Lower Manhattan, correct?
Yeah, Mercer Street is on Mercer.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that whole story actually. But it's interesting that you say all the movement that Tommy had with the bands, going in and out of bands at that time. It was probably very competitive, you think, around that time?
Well, which time are you talking about exactly?
Well, going in and out of the bands. Like you said, he was in this band, then he went in that band.
Well, yeah.
Sounds like there's a competitive vibe out there, like wanting to get into bigger and better bands.
Well, he was always into, getting into bands and playing music, and that was he was really into that. And actually, he got into recording. He wanted to produce and record. So he got, a friend of mine had a recording studio, that 30 Days Out had, and Tommy worked there, and he got really into, doing assistant engineering too.
Yeah. So is that Performance Studios? Because I think you had been involved with Performance Studios. Is that the same place?
No, Performance Studios. Well, Tommy got involved in recording a different studio, but Performance Studios, I brought Tommy and into this building that my cousin was installing locks in this empty loft on 20th Street. And the woman there said to him, do you know anybody that's interested when we build a rehearsal recording studio here? And my cousin recommended me, and I brought in Tommy. So we came in and we designed the place, and we built the place, and we ran the place. So we got time individually to bring in our own groups. At that time, I was working with a different group, and Tommy got to bring in the Ramones to Performance Studios at the time. And at that time, he just wanted to produce them and manage them. He didn't want to be in the group at the time. He brought them into Performance Studios.
Around what year was that? Was that the early 70s?
Yeah, it's probably 73, 74, early that. 74, yeah, 73, 74.
Knowing Tommy as well as you did, were you surprised that he didn't want to be in the band and then ended up being in the band?
Tommy is a great musician. I mean, he could play all sorts of different things. He never played the drums before. He played the guitar basically. But when he brought the Ramones into Performance Studios, it was a three-piece group. It was Joey was on drums and Dee Dee was bass and singing, and Johnny was on guitar. But Dee Dee was having a hard time singing and playing bass. It was so raw at the time, so it was very hard for Dee Dee to, he was still learning the instrument too. But he heard that Joey had a good voice, so he pulled Joey off the drums, and they started looking for drummers. They were bringing different drummers, and at that time, the Ramones were so raw, nobody understood what they were doing. I saw them, I said, what's going on here? Because I was coming from a group that had, we were recording artists, we played out there, we had three-point harmony, so seeing the Ramones first, they were so raw, it was like jarring at the time. But Tommy really saw something in the band. So he kept on sitting down on the drums to show these drummers they can play something like this with the band. Eventually they said, hey, why don't you join the group? That's how he joined the group. So he said, okay, I'll join the group. And so he initially just wanted to produce them and manage them at the time.
Yeah, so he's kind of a visionary, the way you describe him.
I'd say he's the architect of the Ramones, really.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way you talk about Tommy, because I've listened to other interviews that you've done as well, and it sounds like he was a bit of a father figure to the band in the beginning, outside of you. Would you agree to that?
I wouldn't say father figure, more a manager.
Manager. Okay. All right.
No,
good.
It wasn't. They were the same age, basically. Johnny was the same age, maybe a little bit older than Tommy, and Tommy's my age, and Joey and Dee Dee were a bit younger. But I'd say managerial type of thing. He was very into the managing part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting too because you mentioned that he ended up being the drummer. So he kept trying to show them the beat, but he was the only one that really knew the beat and could kind of capture the beat.
Well, he actually he invented that style of playing with the Ramones, which was an unusual type of style that the drummers at the time, they couldn't understand what the Ramones were doing at the time, So when Tommy left the band, they brought in Marky, who was a great drummer. He came from Richard Hell Voidoids and Dust. He was, recording and really good drummer, but he had to sit down with Tommy for a while and see how Tommy fit into the drumming style that he developed for the Ramones, which was unusual.
Yes, but also their sound is somewhat timeless because many other bands have come through, not just the punk scene, but in all other music venues. And no one's really captured their sound. They still sound as unique as they did back then.
It's a very unique sound. That's why all these drummers had trouble trying to blend in with the group,
Yeah.
And Tommy actually had to develop that whole drumming style.
Yeah. It's interesting because the way you talk about starting out with the Ramones, you weren't always their tour manager. So what was your relationship before you became tour manager?
Well, at Performance Studios, they started doing showcases where they'd send out flyers and invite a bunch of people down. Sometimes they charged $2 at the door, and they needed somebody to run the sound for the showcases. That's where I started working with them, running the soundboard at Performance Studios for the showcases. And things, eventually the, studio had to close down because the neighbors shut us down because of noise complaint. It was such unfortunate. But at that time, they were starting getting jobs at CBGB's and other little small venues in the area. And they said, why don't you come along and, do the sound for us? And Tommy, working in recording studios, knew a lot about PAs and engineering and stuff like that. So he actually taught me to run the boards. And when we went out into like CBGB's, I'd run the boards and do the sound for them initially at the beginning.
And that was their main place in the beginning. They played so many shows, one right after the other. I think they had like standing sets in the beginning. Is that correct?
What sets? What?
Did they have like standing sets? Were they like a regular band after a while?
Yeah. They played there about over 60, 70 times. That's where they developed their whole act. If you look at some of the early videos of them, they were so raw and they were stopping and starting and fighting but they developed over there. They played and really got down their whole act together there at CBGB's, which is great.
Yeah. And their sets were very short. I remember reading somewhere that it was like 3 or 4 songs and then they would be off and then they would be back on. Is that correct? Like the sets were shorter, right?
Well, yeah, they played very short songs. Their songs were like very, 3-minute songs so they would play like 20 songs in a half an hour, which was, different. 20, 30 songs. It was really fast. And that's how they developed the whole style of the, like lightning playing at the time. So when I was working with doing sound for them, then they started getting jobs out on the road, and then they said, why don't you come out with us and do this? So the first couple of years, about a year and a half or 2, I was the sound man for the band, and then they decided to get a professional sound man and sound company with a good, really pro sound mixer and a monitor guy. And then from that point, I kind of moved over to like road manager. So I learned, at the time I saw how things were running, how to work with the crew and roadies and stuff like that. So I worked my way up from sound man to road manager to tour manager eventually.
Yeah. So climbing those different roles or being in those different roles, actually in a way, did you find that you had a different style of leadership from being the sound man then to being the road and then going into tour managing? You had to maybe perhaps change how you dealt with the guys in those different capacities. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Because with the sound man, you just dealt with, you didn't deal with the roadies initially. Like a road manager had to hire roadies, pay the roadies, make sure the roadies moved the equipment around. And eventually, when I worked my way with the tour manager, I was going on with the band basically. And then we had to not being with the crew more, but more of the band. So I worked my way up. It is a totally different thing, from being a sound man to being a road manager, tour manager. It's a whole different, bag of tricks there.
It's almost in retrospect, thinking about how this kind of came about. Did you feel that it was almost better it happened that way than to be stepping right into tour manager and not having had that time or the background with the band, this particular band?
Well, you got to realize they started off very raw with very minimal amount of people and crew and stuff like that. So it was different. I had to work my way up. The bigger they got, the more people they hired. The truck drivers, car roadies, and drum roadies, and monitor men, and tour sound men, and merchandising people, and then gradually working up to working in the early years, booking, not booking the band, but working with the promoters and the club owners and stuff. So that's how I learned how to the whole on the road with the band from the bottom up.
Yeah, I would think working as their sound guy, you would probably get a real quick idea of their personalities individually. Would you agree to that?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean,
yeah. That's probably the piece that helped you the most, by seeing how they needed to set up their equipment or how much time someone needed, or, that kind of defines someone's personality before they perform. Some people need more time, or some people have their habits or certain things that they have, rituals that they go through, and,
Oh,
any
rituals. Yes, yes, rituals. Yes, I can say there was lots of rituals with the band, especially
I'm
Joey had his
sure.
rituals. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
Especially in performing, every performer has a different way. They have what they feel makes them comfortable. But as a young, like they started out so young, they probably didn't know themselves very well. So they were probably trying out different things to make themselves feel comfortable. And you were right there as the sound person to kind of witness, well, the last show he wanted it this way. Now this show he wants it that way. Like, sounds are kind of a big deal, especially in smaller venues like CBGBs and certain places where they may have been constructed in a certain way, where if you relocated to your next venue, the same sound could have sounded differently because of the venue you were playing in, correct?
correct. Well, one of the first things when the Ramones got some money in their early years, they bought their own PA system. So we brought our own PA system on the road because at that time, the late, mid 70s, early 70s, clubs had a crappy PA system, really garbagey PA system. They weren't, so they were into the sound. People think that they were just sloppy, play three songs, three chords and play, it was simple. It wasn't. They really worked on their sound. So initially they got some good equipment together when they got some money and a PA system initially. They bought their own PA system because later on we got a good company with the sound man, and he brought his own PA system because they got bigger and bigger. So the PA system we had outgrew some of the venues we had. So that's why we hired a professional sound man with a bigger company so they can bring in bigger PAs. But initially they worked on their sound, and they realized that they had to bring in their own PA to these clubs so they sound good.
Yeah. So that's pretty impressive of them. I guess my other question is, it's kind of interesting because there's so many stories, and I have your book, and I think your book is wonderful, and I've gone through it so many times since I received it. Not just the pictures, but the stories and the way you have the book lined out, and you can hear the speaking voice of every member of the band, the way you tell stories. I really love how you do the book. But one thing that I'm kind of like fascinated by is, the stories about the band. When did you realize, or when did they realize that, wow, we're really famous? Like, they might have thought they were like regular guys, and they may have thought that they're, it's the East Village and, where we are and what we're doing. When did it really hit you all that this is a bigger deal right now?
I believe in 75, there was a CBGB's festival, and they got a lot of press at the time. They were one of the bands that got the most of the press from that festival that they played in. And then in 76, they went over to England. And of course, in England, the music scene there was really bigger than the States because at that time, well, the music scene in England was always big. They always had these Melody Maker and all these music papers over there, that they didn't have here really in the States as much as there. So when they went over to England after the CBGB's festival, they got all this write-up from all over the place from that particular festival. And then they went to England and they, got a lot of write-up there, and all these other, up and coming young kids saw them, the Clash and the Sex Pistols, and they started their whole movement over there after seeing the Ramones. So that's when they realized they were responsible for a whole different thing, and they realized they were bigger than bigger than they thought they would be at the time.
Yeah. So the timeline that you mentioned, Monte, which is so important, is 1975 was when they were signed with Sire Records. So 75 they were signed, and then in 76 they have the experience of going overseas and seeing the reaction of how maybe fans or the music culture saw them. So it's kind of like it's a short timeline of going from getting this record deal to starting to tour, that when it really kind of clicked in, because it had to be shocking. I mean, I know that wherever bands become famous, crowds start forming. So do you have any stories about, maybe the band was like overrun maybe on one of these early ideas
Well,
of
the
we're famous?
well then the problem we had with the music that Ramones played, which before they weren't called punk rock, they kind of that name stuck to them after, Punk Magazine and all that. They didn't particularly like being called punk rock, but the whole punk rock music scene started getting bigger and bigger. And the problem we had was the kids wanted to get on stage and jump into the audience, and then the mosh pits going, and the band didn't like anybody coming on stage at the time. And it was kind of jarring to see all that happening, with the kids jumping on stage, jumping off. So I had a lot of time, I had to get barriers and security guards in front of the stage for eventually and stuff like that. And then we had problems. Some club owners in the early years would see the mosh pits and the slam dancing. They said, "What's going on? Stop the show. There's a riot going on." I said, "No, that's the kids like to do that." I wouldn't want to jump in off the stage into an audience or go into those mosh pits with the slam dancing. That all developed, and from England too, that happened, So that was a bit jarring for them, and we had kind of changed. They didn't want anybody getting on stage. We had to have barriers and stuff like that.
Yes. It's interesting that you say that, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because if anyone hasn't gotten the book, once they get the book, they'll be able to see how you kept everything. I saw it, literally, it's like a photostat of how you mapped out how the stage should look, where the amps are, and it says barriers on the stage, like you have it, like it's
the security guards.
Yeah, exactly. You have it right on the map, like you want it to look exactly the way you want it to look. So you kept all that. There's receipts in there and everything.
Well, that's one of the jobs of a tour manager is the writer. There's a writer that goes out to clubs and venues that has all the information you want them to deal with, catering and power and how we set up the stage, where we want the PA. And it was like 16 pages of stuff that I had to go through with each venue. So that was one of the facts that before we went to different venues, I'd call up the promoters or the venue club owners and make sure, look, I want this, this, and this. Make sure you have this, this, and this. So that's another job of the tour manager, road manager, that the sound man wouldn't have to do that,
How many places turned you guys away because they heard about this kind of? Was there a place they weren't allowed to go?
We never, because early on we got booking agents.
Okay.
So the booking agents would deal with the promoters and the venues. They never told us this place didn't want you or something like that.
Okay, good.
So the booking agent was here's your tour. You go here, 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 and here. And then I get that from the booking agent and then plan out the tour.
Okay.
Logistics of the tour, which was pretty, there's a lot of different things that a road manager, tour manager has to do. Getting the crew there, getting the equipment there, make sure everything in the club's right, and et cetera, et cetera. It's on and on. That's why I put in the book basically what it was like for the roadies and my perspective of being on the road. So that's why I put in little bits of riders in there and stuff like that.
Yes. One thing I thought it was interesting, because there's a lot of things in the book, but in particular, there's a couple of photos where there's like, a few lines on the side explaining the photo, which I appreciated because you have all the behind the scenes story, There's a photograph and it looks like they had been doing a video, or they were getting ready to do a video, and somebody's running in with like a sign and it says Melnick with like a slash through it, like no Melnick. And I'm looking at it like, okay, like I couldn't figure it out. And I'm like, I definitely want to ask Monte about that. So what's the story behind that? That we're getting ready to do like a music video or something?
That was from the Sedated music video. If you watch the music video, Sedated.
Okay.
You haven't seen that. Have you seen that?
I thought I saw it, but I don't remember the sign. Is the sign?
Well, that comes out so quickly. That's the thing.
Okay.
But I got a screenshot of that, so I figured I'd put it in. But that's a joke. That's a joke. The no Melnick's thing is a joke that goes back to the crew. One day, I was going to the crew room and there was a sign that said no Melnick's. Can't come into the crew room. No Melnick's. Then all of a sudden, in these different clubs and places, the wonderful crew they would write on the walls and the ceilings, no Melnicks, no Melnicks. People would come back to me and said, hey, we just played this club and we saw this sign, no Melnicks over there, no Melnicks over there. What's the story? I said, that's the crazy crew, you know? So they brought that into the video. And also there's another video, that they actually paid to, put it up on the sign in Times Square. You know, underneath the building.
Really? Okay.
In the middle of the video, I forget the name of the video. So they actually paid to have it put up, flashed on Times Square, no Melnick. So they thought it was funny.
I have to find that. I'm going to have to find that. That's cool. That is really cool. Wow. And Times Square of all places, that's definitely a recognizable place. You know, Rock and Roll High School was, they were picked to be in Rock and Roll High School. And, you know, I love the book. Someone wrote a book about it named Stephen B. Armstrong.
Yeah, it just came out.
There's a movie, the movie about it. I love the movie. I've seen the movie like 10 times. You know, it has its own kind of cult following, that movie itself, but do you have any behind the scenes stories about like, were they always going to be selecting the Ramones, or what was the Ramones idea when they got the call that maybe they should be the band for it? Like only you would know that, but like, how do the guys react to that? Like being in a movie or having to be around Hollywood people. There were some famous actor and actresses in that film.
Well, just to wind back for a second, that book, by Stephen Armstrong, the cover of the book, you can see me behind Dee Dee. I'm actually on the cover. It's right behind Dee Dee.
Cause that was
a shot from the movie where I'm in the movie. I do a little cameo appearance in the movie. I kind of walk across the screen and open the door when they're saying, I just want to have something to do in the pink Cadillac, and they come out and sing, I just want to have something to do, and they walk on the street. So I'm behind them talking to the manager. That's one of my cameos in the movie. I have another little shot where they're chasing backstage. But originally, I think they wanted cheap. Alan Arkish, great director, great person, good friend of mine. After the movie here, they wanted Cheap Trick initially, and they turned them down. And so Alan, was a fan of the Ramones and said, come on, let's do the movie. He came to see them play a couple of times, and brought them into the movie, and they were thrilled. Johnny and Marky, they're film buffs. They like movies and collected movie posters and stuff. So they were thrilled to be in a movie. Why not? The only thing about that is that you don't realize when you're doing a movie, it's a lot of sitting around. You sit around for 2 hours, and they set up a scene and go on. Then 10 minutes they shoot, then they pull you off again, and then they see you sit around for another hour, and then they set up another shot. So they did, being there very antsy. They didn't like to do anything, long or sit around for no reason at all. That got to them a bit. I liked it because I could walk around and watch things going on and the setup and stuff. But that was one of the things that, being in the movie that they Johnny was a little antsy about the whole thing. Dee Dee was.
How long was that whole experience? Like the filming, were you there for a month or?
No, a little less than a month, couple of weeks. In fact, the thing is that they didn't really pay them a lot to be in the movie. So in between, we had a couple of weeks in between. We were setting up the things. We actually went on the road and played gigs to support us to being out there. At that time, when we got a bunch of gigs with Black Sabbath, boy, that was crazy. Opening up for them.
That's an interesting combination. That's interesting, right? Because they always say the band that opens for the main band, everyone's like watching the, opening band, like, what do we got here,
Well, that was a problem.
How did that go?
That was a problem. You see, in the early years, a lot of booking agents didn't know what to do with the Ramones, where to put them, So they started, open up to this group like Black Sabbath or Toto. We opened up for it. How's that? That's a crazy opening. But at the time, early on, when we did the Black Sabbath tour, people didn't know the Ramones, and they didn't want to hear anything. So it was kind of dangerous because they were throwing stuff at the stage, batteries.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
It got really dangerous there for a while.
And these were all California because you were in California, so
Yeah.
all the
Oh,
venues
yeah.
were,
Arizona, California, up and down there. Yeah.
they were outdoor or indoor, or you don't
They were
recall?
inside. They were inside.
Oh, so that makes it more dangerous.
Yeah, and they didn't want to
Wow.
hear. They didn't know anything about the Ramones, and when you never heard the Ramones before, it's kind of jarring. Oh my God, you know. And so got dangerous. Really, they were
They
throwing stuff.
just want Black Sabbath to come on. They probably started chanting like
But
many crowds do, right?
earlier in the '77, we did a big outdoor festival in Canada, opening up for Ted Nugent.
Oh, Ted. Oh, wow.
And I think Aerosmith was on the bill too. We were opened up early on, and the Canadian crowd didn't like the Ramones, but they were just throwing like food on the stage. You know, so it was kind of like,
Oh,
there's a famous shot that somebody took because they played like three, four, 5 songs, and they went off stage giving the finger to like 30,000
yeah.
people because at that time it was just food being thrown. But the Black Sabbath got a little dangerous to the hard stuff they were throwing on stage. I think
Wow.
an ice pick came up on stage or something like that. You know.
Wow. Yeah. You have some great stories. You know, I wanted to go back to the whole rock and roll high school movie for a minute because Spencer Drake, who's a friend of yours and mine, he did the album cover for Road to Ruins, which is also shown in that's the album cover that they show in Rock and Roll High School. He also did a second album for them as well. Do you want to speak about the album covers or what the Ramones felt about participating and maybe ideas about album covers, or they just really weren't involved?
No, they were involved in the beginning. They worked with a guy, good friend of mine, George DeBose, a very good photographer initially. And as I said, they liked working with him because he did photo shoots really fast, you know. A lot of photographers, you know, take too much time, and then the Ramones got antsy and they said, no, we don't want to do that. So, George came up and, he did a lot of the earlier, he did like 6 different covers for the Ramones. They give him an idea and they come up with it. He'd come up with the idea for the cover and, some interesting stuff that the Too Tough to Die album, that's a famous one. They're silhouetted in the tunnel there, which was terrific. That came about as an accident, actually. Are you familiar with that cover?
Yes, I've seen that cover. What is the accident? How did that come about?
Well, initially he had a front and back lights on them. And the front, he would take like Polaroids of the shots to look how they would come out, but the front light didn't fire on that shot. And they looked at the Polaroid and said, this is good. So that's how that came out. It was actually an accident.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
And
that's iconic to the time because they don't even use the same equipment probably in photography now, right?
I'm not sure. But George is a great photographer. And at that cover, they wanted to do something like the Clockwork Orange. They wanted to look like the Clockwork Orange guys coming in a tunnel. And, you know, there's a scene in Clockwork Orange where they kicked some bums in the tunnel or whatever. They wanted to get that feeling. So George picked the tunnel in Central Park near the Carousel. That's one of the famous tunnels.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And
that is so cool. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Now that I know the backstory, now I'm going to look at the album covers differently.
There's a lot of stories. Like, I mean, there's 13 albums, and
yeah,
we go over a few other ones. But what happened was later on, Gary Kurfürst, Danny Fields and Linda Stein were the first managers. When they left, Gary Kurfürst came in. He managed the B-52s and Talking Heads, really high class manager. But he wanted a piece of their merchandising, that was their bread and butter on the road because they weren't selling a lot of albums, you know. It took them 40 years to get a gold album. They were no longer, you know, they got a gold album finally. Now they're selling albums, but back in the early days, touring was their bread and butter, and on the road, merchandising, you know, the T-shirts and stuff.
Yes. You know, that's the thing I was going to mention because Arturo Vega was the one that did their, you know, creative director. He did all of their T-shirts and stuff. And there's this kind of interesting story about how he was making them in this loft in Brooklyn or something. Is that correct?
No, Manhattan.
Oh, Manhattan.
A loft like a block away from CBGB's. Well, that's how he was a big fan, and a big friend of Ramones. He was at all the rehearsals. He was, in the early years at Performance Studios. He was always hanging out with the band, and then when they started getting gigs on the road, he said, "Oh, I can work the lights," because he was a great artist. So he knew a lot about art, and his lighting come from his ability with his colors and stuff like that. So the only way we can get him on the road in the early years was he'd print a bunch of T-shirts and sell them on the road, and that would pay for his way to get on the road. Eventually, he got on the payroll, but they realized they were selling a lot of merchandising, and he developed the whole, early shirts. Is I think the shot in there, the different shirts. They first started with just the Ramones on a shirt, just in letters. And then he had an eagle, an early eagle on a belt buckle. I think if you see the eagle on the inside of the, Ramones first album, that's Arturo's belt buckle, eagle. And then one day we were in Washington DC and Arturo sees the Great Seal of the United States. He said, well, this is something. So he took that Great Seal. There's a whole thing in my book about how he developed that whole seal into that logo, which is an iconic logo. It's like you see that all over the place. He was developed that. Arturo was the one that developed that whole thing.
Yeah. So the U.S. seal, is, has their names around, putting each member of the band around in a circle. And the idea that he picked it to be in black and white is very eye-catching. But was any of the members of the band more political than the others? Because most people see that, they automatically think of Washington D.C., maybe the president's office or politics in general. So was there anything there?
They wanted to have an American feel. That's Arturo grew up in Mexico, and he was an American citizen later on, but he wanted to, and Johnny was very, wanted to have the American feel. That's why he put the baseball bat there, because he was a baseball fan. And there's also a song called Beat on the Brat.
Yes.
They took out the fig leaves and put in apples. So that's an American thing too, So that's an American feel that Arturo wanted, and the band loved it. And a lot of people took that logo and developed their own little thing. And the good part about it is they could plug in different members in the group when one left, and they just, that was easy to plug in a new member,
That's right. That's right. Yeah. It's interesting when it comes to bands, because I have a lot of friends in the music business, and one of the highest compliments they get is when a fan comes up to them and rolls up their sleeve and shows them a tattoo of them or the band or the name. So did you guys have any fans coming up to you that started to put Ramones on them in the form of a tattoo or something?
Oh my God, there's hundreds of tattoos.
Yeah, see? That's the highest compliment, I think.
Well, if you look in the book, Arturo was such a big fan, he put that seal on his back, full size.
Yes.
Full size.
Yes.
The funny thing about that is he put Tommy, Dee Dee, Joey, and Artie. And at the time Marky was in the band, Marky got pissed off at him.
Oh,
his back, his tattoo, but Marky's.
Yeah, it didn't have the name on there. I know.
Put my name in the thing, blah, blah. That's funny. He got upset about that.
Yeah, I could see that being, touchy. Yeah.
And get that, the whole back was, I think there's a picture of it in the book there, of his back.
I have the book right in front of me. Yeah.
It's in the back there.
I love it. This book is so wonderful. And it's just filled with stuff, but it's how it's laid out, and it's just so easy to look at, and there's references in the back and everything. So this is great. Well,
the lucky part about that is when I was doing the book, the publisher let me put in a lot of pictures and memorabilia and posters. Yes. It's unusual at the time because usually a book is like some text, pictures in the middle, text, picture in the middle, But they got a great art director for the book. And they let me put in over 300 so images, and then and behind the text there's different pictures and colors and things that I was really happy about that.
Yeah, well, I'm very impressed with it, and you even, it's interesting because there's so many stories, and I bookmarked the book for myself because there's so much in it, but I bookmarked certain areas because of the interview. And I read this part and I thought, oh my God, this is a great story. But there's not enough of the story there. I'm like, I have to ask Monte the details, but you talk about like waking up in a hotel and like coming across like a crime scene. And it was like someone had been murdered or something. It's like, what's going on? It's like, I want to know more.
Well, some of the problems in the early years, we weren't staying at the greatest hotels. This was a Howard Johnson hotel by the LAX airport, you know. It wasn't the greatest
Oh,
hotel in the world.
okay.
So, we woke up one day in our floor, we're walking down the hall, there's the police there, we look in the room, there's a dead body there. The police, somebody shot somebody. Was
Wow.
in the early years we had, we didn't have a lot of money. So I was booking, not the greatest hotels at the time, it's whatever we could afford at the time. That particular hotel by the LAX airport was not a great place.
Yeah, I'm sure. So during your touring years, and you have so much in this book about your touring, but it must have been difficult. I mean, so the guys are on and they perform, but it's before getting on the stage and after getting on the stage, could be kind of a trying time for a tour manager. So did you run into any delays, we have a weather delay or we have a transportation delay, or did you feel that pressure of like not making a gig or not, maybe not getting there on time? Or because you mentioned like the cover, which I think is terrific, and it's very like character like, and it's a bus and you're like driving the bus. You weren't flying to everything. So just so the audience knows, not everything was done by air travel. So, you could have
No,
ran
no,
into
no, no,
weather problems or whatever. So what was your experience traveling that way?
no. First of all, we didn't have any Spinal Tap moments where we got lost backstage. So. Almost. Some of the venues, bigger like arenas, you'd go into these corridors and stuff. Yeah, well, they had developed a style. Well, the reason the book cover there is I was trying to come up with a way of what to put on the cover of my book, because I worked with 8 different Ramones over the years, 4 at a time in a group. I didn't want to put in 4 different pictures or just photos. So that John Holmstrom, we came up with this idea of me in the van with all 8 Ramones, and we're coming out of New York there. There's CBGBs in the back and the Pinheads chasing after us. And John Holmstrom did a great job on the cover there, by the way. He's, punk magazine. Joey's actually reading a punk magazine on the cover there, if you look at it.
Yes. Yeah.
And Johnny was, if you look at Johnny carefully, he was a big Yankees fan. He has a Yankees
Yes.
shirt there.
Yeah. I see that.
And of course,
And
there's a sign 2,263 miles to go. You know what that is? You know what that means?
how many shows you did,
Yeah,
right?
how many shows they played.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's stuff flying off the top. There's Yoo-Hoo bottles and stuff. There's a whole story about Yoo-Hoo. But
And the baseball bat again is in there. Yeah.
initially, they drove everywhere, basically. I mean, we were driving. And we had different vehicles, station wagons, and we tried a couple of tour buses, but the tour buses are very expensive. You had to sleep on the tour bus. They didn't like sleeping on the tour buses, and then you had to pay for the driver, and they were very expensive. So they later on in the States, they developed a little style of touring where they do sections of the country. We'd fly out to LA and have the crew would drive the van out there, and then we do like up and down the West Coast for a couple of weeks, come back to New York. Then we'd go out to Midwest, have the 2 or 3 weeks in the Midwest, and come back to New York. And then maybe in the East Coast, we did 2 or 3 weeks, but basically in vans in the States. And in Europe, we did tour buses, but not sleep on tour buses. We like to have, hotels and stuff. But we had a few tour buses also in the States, but as I said, it became very expensive. So they developed this whole style of the van tour. That's why we're in the van there driving around.
Yeah, I think it's terrific. There's a skyline and everything. It's really amazing. It's a great New York. Even on the book, the spine of the book, it has the crest, the U.S., seal. The U.S. seal is on the spine of the book, which I thought was really great. But,
Well, it's also on the license plate if you look carefully. It's a little.
oh, you're right. Look at that. Well, that's amazing. That is amazing.
You gotta look carefully.
Wow. Yeah. You could look at this really honestly for hours. But, the thing that I was getting back to, because I did see it in the book, a lot of candid photos of the band. But it's also it's a very honest book. The band did get involved with, partying and, a little bit of what considered to be a little bit of the wild side of living life. So did you find that hard to manage when you were on tour?
Well, that's one of the jobs of a tour manager, road manager. You not only have to deal with a crazy band, but a crazy crew on top of that. So it's also nutty people running around doing crazy things that you don't want them to do at the time. You know?
I can
Yeah.
relate.
So that was,
So you're,
you had to rein in
yeah,
a lot of
yeah,
stuff. And Didi was like, he was the bigger problem over the years, because he'd run off after we come back from venue and disappear. And he was a problem, with the drugs and stuff like that.
yeah, he struggled. Yeah.
But basically, when you're touring and you're doing so many shows in a row, you can't really do so many shows, and you got to get up the next day and drive and play a show, then get up the next day, drive. So they realized they really couldn't party a lot, that they wanted to party. You know what I mean? Because
Well, they had to perform. Yeah.
they
So,
realized the life on the road,
correct.
it wouldn't have lasted that long.
That's right.
A lot of bands fizzled out that way,
Well, they actually burn out.
Burnout, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Going around to small towns, I'm sure stepping into, a few hotels or stepping into a few stores, they must have had a reaction from people. I mean, they're very unusual looking for here in New York City. I mean, to us, it just looked like 1980s, but I mean, for some other smaller towns, I'm sure they probably had a reaction, right?
When they weren't known and stuff like that, they were from us. Well, I'll tell this story, a million times. We're 70 something and we're driving around Texas, like a rural Texas, like way in the boondocks, and we needed gas, so we stopped at a convenience store. And this is after like a 5-hour drive, so they stumbled out of the van, start walking around looking the way they did. So I went up and got some gas and then paid the attendant, and she says to me, "Well, it's sure nice of you taking care of those retarded boys."
Wow.
I said, "Yes, ma'am, that's my job."
Wow.
They look like something after a 5-hour drive, Joey and Didi, and they're stumbling around looking at cookies and things like that. It was one of, but later on when people realized who they were, it wasn't that crazy a reaction,
Oh, yeah, but smaller towns and times have changed, times have really changed. We've really seen things change in life. But it's interesting too, they did have a specific look. Even in the movie, they kept their look, they kept the way they would wear their clothes, and even they did references to the band in the movie, like pizza. And there's a lot of stories about them not wanting regular food. So you must have seen their obsession with pizza. That's not just like a joke. That was real for them, correct?
Well, they had pizza on the rider. So in other words, if they were ever hungry after a show, we would get a pizza in there so they could eat something. Sometimes the hospitality, the catering in a small club wasn't really good, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So after the show, they'd get hungry, so we'd have a pizza there. We'd get Domino's because we knew the consistency of Domino's, because sometimes you'd come to a small town and the pizza there wasn't good,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So that was one of the things in the rider we put in just in case they were hungry.
Yeah. It's interesting. So when did you come up with the idea about doing the book? Because, there's a lot of time on your timeline. So when were you able to kind of collaborate everything and bring it all together for this?
Well, a lot of times after the Ramones retired and stuff like that, people come to me, got to write a book, I was not really a writer, I didn't know anything about writing and stuff like that. So and at the time Joey was around, I didn't kind of want to say things in the book that would kind of make him upset. So after he passed away, I felt I could really get into doing a book. But before that, he had put a solo album on Sanctuary Records. And a good friend of mine, Kevin Patrick, got him the deal there. And he knew that Sanctuary had a publishing company. So he brought me in, and they said, "Oh, okay, we'll do the book and we'll find a ghostwriter for you." So they got a different bunch of people then, but one of the guys they brought in was Frank Meyer, a terrific guy. He's really talented. He's actually on the road now. He's a big Ramones fan and a talented writer. He wrote for the LA papers, and he was also a great musician and a huge Ramones fan. Actually, he's in Spain playing with another group. He plays with a lot of different groups, Frank Meyer. So I brought him in, and he did such a great job. They gave him co-writing on the book instead of a ghostwriter. And it took a couple of months. I brought him over to my house. Luckily, I saved a lot of stuff, in my room, in one of my spare rooms. I had all this stuff sitting there for years. Posters and tour itineraries and buttons, badges, t-shirts, blah, blah, a ton of stuff. So we went through the stuff, and actually had to send it to England. They photographed it, and as I said, the art director did such a great job putting it together into the book. Luckily, they sent it back to me. I got most of it back. I think I lost a button or something. But all that stuff went over there first and came back. And that's how we worked on the book. And we sit down and interview people. So a lot of oral history in the book. So we'd interview a lot of people for the book.
Well, I can't thank you enough for doing this book. It's a treasure trove. If anyone is a Ramones fan, I mean, they will just completely absorb this, every word of it. I wanted to go back to one or two things that you had talked about. I had seen a couple of, just stumbling over things over the years. And, not too long ago, I stumbled over an interview that Joey Ramone was in, and it was with Geraldo Herreras. And apparently he had brought out rock and roll moms.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. But then Charlotte, wonderful woman.
Oh my gosh. You know, when I stumbled over that, and I saw there was like a light in her eyes when she talked about her son. She even sang the song, you know, she was doing the lyrics of the song, and you know, it was really something to see.
Well,
and the way she presented it, I mean, this was her son. It didn't matter if he was in the Ramones or any other group. This was her son, you know. It was kind of neat to see that. So you probably saw a lot of their kind of family stuff or their personal stuff, right?
Well, yeah, but eventually, my girlfriend's sister was Angela, who dated Joey for a while, so we became very friendly with the family. I would go over Christmas at their house, Charlotte's house, and Thanksgiving, and I was pretty close to, after Tommy left the band, with Joey. So I'm very close to Charlotte. Wonderful person.
Oh, yeah. Well, that interview, I saw her face light up, and, you know, I thought it was really cute the way she was like, you know, so Ramones, and it was just really neat to see that. And so you introduced this girl to Joey, and then he dated her. Is that how it worked?
Yeah, they almost got married.
Wow.
Angela, my girlfriend Camille was, her sister was Angela, and we were hanging out together, and then Joey met her and became very, you know, almost went all the way.
Wow. Yeah.
And they broke up, and then Linda left. Linda was dating Joey for a while, you know, Linda, who jumped over to Johnny afterward. And then they married, and they were married for 20 years. So,
that's right.
Linda was actually going out with Joey for a while.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Wow, the rock and roll story.
A little complicated there, right? Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things we could do. I mean, I'm sorry I skipped around a bunch of things. I was in the middle of different things, but I mean,
I know.
We're going to talk about each different album cover and all the different things.
There's so much you could talk about. I know. Well, we have a few minutes left. So what I want to do is I want to ask you one question, and then I want you to talk about whatever you would like to talk about. But I find this question kind of fascinating. With so many of the members that are gone now, if you had the opportunity to relive any day with any one Ramone again, what would that look like?
Impossible. I mean, it's about 20 something years.
I know.
8 different people and all different personalities and friendships and stuff. I can't really pick one day for that, really.
I know. It would be too hard. I know. But I'm sure you have, you know, in groups of people or in long-term relationships, every once in a while, I know this has happened to me because I was in the military for 30 years. And every once in a while, I think of an event that happened, or I think about a team, you know, a team of soldiers that I was leading, or we were on the road, or we were, you know, on a deployment, or something was happening. And all of a sudden, a memory will pop in my head, and I'll either laugh or I'll get as mad as I did that day. You know, like certain things come back to you crystal clear, you know? So I don't know. I mean, whatever you would like to say. I mean, it's just so many years for you.
It's like, and you know, Marky Ramone was great when he came into the band, and he left and he came back in again. Richie Ramone's terrific. I mean, if Marky's still out there playing around, Marky plays strictly Ramones sets. Richie's out there playing Richie Ramone. He was great. It was a pleasure being in the band, working with him. And talk about military. CJ, he was a Marine, ex-Marine.
Oh,
So it was
wow.
great working with him because when I said be in a lobby at X number of hours, he would be. He was
You
well
would be
trained,
on
but
time.
he was well trained, and it was a pleasure dealing with CJ. And he's out there
Oh,
playing with different groups, and he had his own stuff together. And then we had one little instance with the drummer from Blondie, Clem Burke, who was Elvis Ramone. He played 2 shows with the Ramones. He was a good friend of mine. And so there's so many different, people that were in and out of my life over the years there. So it's hard to say. That's why I kind of wrote the book, to put all the memories,
yeah. Well, you did an amazing job. I'm so very proud of this, and I'm very proud of knowing and meeting you. It's just really great. I just wanted to mention, we're going to play a couple of songs from the Ramones, but you're mentioned in 2 of the songs. So can you mention those?
Well, all the way, Joey mentions me. And the second, so it's touring, I'm not mentioning that song. He did write another song later on, which is on the B-side of something. But touring is never boring. I like that song because it talks about touring on the road. But the song All the Way on the End of the Century, Joey writes me into the song. He says, Monte's driving me crazy. It's like being in the Navy.
Oh, wow.
Thank you, Joey. So it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure being in a Ramones song.
Oh, yeah. That is so great. Wow.
I want to
Well,
thank Spencer Drake for, telling me to do something with you and, getting involved with you, by the way.
oh, sure. Spencer is amazing. He's such a great guy, and he has so many stories just like you. The music is in his blood, and I say that all the time, but people that have been in the music business and even go back many years. I mean, you guys both are like, you were running around in the 70s, so this has been in your blood for a long time. So I just really greatly appreciate you guys coming on the show and sharing your experiences and documenting your work. Spencer and you and all of these people that I'm trying to get on the show, because it's historical, and it's music and history. And it's also the young kids that are listening to music. They're still listening to this stuff. It's not going away.
That amazes me how today the Ramones are so much bigger than that
Correct.
when they were together. And so unfortunately, the original 4 members are not here, to
That's
see
right.
how big they are.
It lives on, lives on.
I think the legacy of the Ramones was when in the early years they'd play all these little small clubs in different countries, and kids would come to see them and said, if they could do that, it's not that difficult. Good songs. They were okay, and then playing the instruments. They didn't have to do solos and stuff like that. All these bands formed after seeing the Ramones, and give them credit. U2, Pearl Jam, Metallica. I remember one time we were playing Ohio, and these kids come back, hey, we're Metallica, we love you guys,
Yeah.
And then years later, in '96, the Lollapalooza tour said Metallica, Soundgarden, Rancid, the Ramones, and then they put the Ramones on stage, and all these other bands, they're on the side of the stage, fans of the Ramones.
Watching the band. I know. They're amazing. They're timeless.
So that's
They're
the legacy,
timeless.
because they went out there like kind of Johnny Appleseed, spreading the apples around. We can do it like this, you can do it like this, and all these bands formed.
That's right. That's right. Well, the biggest thing I think of after looking at your book and talking with you is that they had tenacity. They had resilience. They could have quit. They could have said, forget it. It's too hard. People aren't accepting us. We're not making it big. We're not getting discovered. They didn't do that. They just continued to forge forward, so that I think themselves, that's just kind of a testimony of who the original guys were,
True.
Really great. Well, thank you again. I cannot thank you enough. This is Monte A. Melnick, tour manager for the Ramones, and a wonderful person, and author of On the Road with the Ramones bonus edition, which is available on Amazon. The co-author is Frank Meyer, and this is Bringing the Darkness to the Light. Remember, love never dies, and be all you can be. I will see everyone next week. Thank you.
Gabba gabba hey.